Buenas noches a todos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos en esta, la tercera reunión científica del mes de agosto de la Academia Argentina de Cirugía. No habiendo aportes ni discusiones atrasadas y habiendo sido aprobada el acta de la sesión anterior, pasamos por parte del doctor Sunjo Gion a enumerar los asuntos centrados. Sunjo, por favor.
Buenas noches, muchas gracias, doctor Latif. Quienes se encuentran presentes en las sesiones tanto por Zoom como por YouTube pueden registrar su asistencia a través del link que se provee en ambas plataformas. Recordamos que la asistencia al 50% de las sesiones del año anterior es uno de los requisitos para ingresar como miembro asociado o para pasar de miembro asociado a miembro académico. Los asistentes a las sesiones que no sean miembros de la academia pueden hacer preguntas o comentarios por el chat de YouTube. A fin de cumplir con el objetivo de la academia, es decir, el estudio y difusión del progreso de la cirugía, su campo de acción, sus competencias específicas, la comisión directiva enfatiza la necesidad de que los miembros de la academia envíen comunicaciones, casos interactivos y videos científicos para integrar las sábanas de futuras sesiones. Recordamos que las presentaciones pueden no ser inéditas. Existe interés en que los trabajos leídos en esta academia y que sean inéditos sean enviados para su publicación a la Revista Argentina de Cirugía. Los manuscritos deberán ser enviados por los autores a la Secretaría de la revista. La presentación deberá ajustarse a su reglamento, disponible en la página web de la revista. Todos los trabajos serán enviados a revisión por pares de acuerdo con las políticas de calidad editorial. La comisión directiva recuerda la importancia de mantener al día el pago de la cuota societaria, ya que este recurso económico resulta imprescindible para cubrir los gastos corrientes de las actividades de esta academia. Trabajos a premio. Se anuncia que se ha prorrogado el plazo para la inscripción de trabajos para optar al premio Academia Argentina de Cirugía 2024 hasta el día 15 de septiembre del corriente año. Se recuerda que los trabajos deberán ser inéditos, realizados en Argentina y los autores no ser miembros de la Academia Argentina de Cirugía. Las condiciones están detalladas en el artículo 29 del Estatuto, que también se encuentra en la página web de la Academia. Finalmente, el próximo miércoles 28 de agosto tendremos una reunión conjunta de la Academia Argentina de Cirugía con la Asociación de Cirugía de Córdoba. La sesión estará presidida por sus presidentes, el doctor Jorge Latif por la Academia Argentina de Cirugía y el doctor Gustavo Bertarelli por la Asociación de Cirugía de Córdoba. Se presentará un caso clínico y una conferencia. El caso clínico será un caso de páncreas, presentado por el doctor Paul Lada. Los comentadores serán los doctores Gustavo Coan y el doctor Lucio Beide por invitación. La conferencia será la conversión de gastrectomía vertical en manga, cuándo y por qué, a cargo del doctor José Cook, y serán comentadores el doctor Federico Cuencavente y el doctor Carlos Esquivel por invitación. Nada más.
Muchas gracias, doctor Gion. Bueno, esta noche tenemos el gran honor de la actividad científica. Estará realizada por dos invitados extranjeros, el profesor Funk y la profesora Clarke, que van a darnos dos conferencias por invitación. Son dos distinguidos y reconocidos académicos de los Estados Unidos y para ello esta sesión va a estar coordinada por el doctor Alberto Ferreres, a quien agradecemos el acercamiento de estos profesionales para compartir con nosotros esta noche. Las conferencias van a ser en inglés y les recordamos a quienes estén conectados por el canal de YouTube que pueden optar por la función de traducción simultánea que tienen allí. Así que, doctor Ferreres, muchísimas gracias por este acercamiento y por coordinar la sesión de esta noche.
Muchas gracias, presidente Latif. Voy a compartir pantalla. Tal como mencionó el doctor Latif, los invitados de hoy son la profesora Callisia Clarke y el doctor... voy a presentar primero a la doctora Clarke del Medical College of Wisconsin. Cali no es la primera vez que está en la Argentina, esta es su segunda vez y acá tenemos algunos de los rasgos distintivos de su entrenamiento. Graduada como médica en la Universidad de Cincinnati, completó su residencia en dicha universidad bajo la supervisión del profesor Jeff Matthews, el actual chair de cirugía en la Universidad de Chicago. Completó su residencia en cirugía oncológica en el MD Anderson, uno de los centros de referencia, y desde hace un par de años se desempeña como cirujana oncológica en el Centro de Cáncer del Medical College of Wisconsin, es profesora asociada, es la jefa de la división de oncología quirúrgica de dicha institución y detenta varios cargos académicos y no está actualmente en la Argentina en su calidad de presidenta de la Asociación para la Cirugía Académica, la AAS, con la cual y con el auspicio de la academia hemos organizado 2 jornadas ayer y hoy en la sede de la Asociación Médica Argentina. Por su lado, el profesor Luke Fang, que también es su segunda oportunidad, pertenece a otra institución del mismo estado, la Universidad de Wisconsin-Madison. Estos son los antecedentes del doctor Luke Fang, graduado en la Universidad de Loyola en Chicago, completó su residencia en el Brigham and Women's Hospital en Harvard, fellow de cirugía mínimamente invasiva en la Ohio State University, es el actual jefe de cirugía en el VA, el vicejefe de Research y es cirujano mínimamente invasivo y bariátrico en el Medical College of Wisconsin. Para aquellos que no están familiarizados, Wisconsin es un estado del Midwest que bordea con 2 de los grandes lagos. Madison es la capital del estado y Milwaukee es la ciudad más poblada y está aproximadamente 1 hora en auto de la ciudad de Chicago, o sea, al norte de Chicago. El estado de Wisconsin, dada la casualidad de que los 2 disertantes pertenecen a instituciones en dicho estado, tiene 3 grandes rasgos distintivos. En primer lugar, las cervecerías, de la cual es la más importante y la más antigua es Miller. En segundo lugar, es la sede de la fábrica original de las motocicletas Harley-Davidson y donde se encuentra en Milwaukee el Museo Harley-Davidson, que realmente vale la pena visitar. Y en tercer lugar, son fanáticos del fútbol americano y el equipo del estado son los Green Bay Packers, conocidos de la localidad de Green Bay, bien al norte, y son sus hinchas, sus fanáticos, son conocidos como cheeseheads, cabezas de queso, y esto suele usarlo exteriorizando su fanatismo, y esto tiene que ver con la actividad ganadera y láctea del estado. Lo estuvimos trabajando tanto ayer y hoy. Estas son fotos de las sesiones que tuvimos en el aula de primer piso, con muy buena concurrencia, híbrida, tanto virtual como presencial. Y esta es una foto donde se lo ve a la doctora Clarke y al doctor Fang y a su esposa en el Congreso Argentino de Cirugía del año 2022, justo post pandemia, a cargo de la presidencia del doctor Luis Aroto, y estas son imágenes un poco más recientes del día de ayer y con motivo de esta visita. Con lo cual, ahora yo la voy a invitar, dejo de compartir la pantalla y la invito a compartir pantalla. Callie, ready to go, please, then, con su conferencia.
Buenas noches. Muchas gracias por la invitación. That's the extent of my Spanish, so I will switch to English. But thank you so much for the invitation. We really value our partnerships. Alberto has been a very strong friend of the Association for Academic Surgery, and so it's really an honor to be here with him today and to share some of our time with you all. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you guys can see that now. Good? Okay, great. So as Alberto mentioned, I'm Callisia Clarke. I'm a surgical oncologist and hepatobiliary surgeon at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and it's a privilege for me to serve as the president of the Association for Academic Surgery this year. I wanted to talk a little bit about leadership development and specifically on your leadership style and building your leadership brand. I don't have any disclosures, but I do want to say that this is really mostly a summary of my personal journey to being a good leader, and that journey is still ongoing. I think anyone who leads knows that learning never ends. But I'm hoping some of it will resonate with you tonight and hopefully generate some discussion. So I think for those that are starting their leadership journey, I always encourage them to really ask the question, why do you want to lead? And for us to be brutally honest with ourselves about why we want to do it. There are a lot of pressures, especially in academic surgery and in medicine, to lead for some of the wrong reasons. But ultimately, I think leadership is really service. And so folks that are looking to lead should really be ready to serve. After you decide that you do want to be a leader, I think a lot of what comes next is identifying what your strengths are, maybe even most importantly, identifying what your weaknesses are. And then really understanding that to be an effective leader, you will have to sacrifice something. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of commitment, a lot of resources. And almost always you're giving time away from family, sometimes time away from your clinical practice, time away from your research. And so the leadership role must fulfill another bucket that is meaningful for you in order for this to be a lasting effort that's going to align with everything else that you're doing well. So I also encourage everyone when they're trying to figure out what their leadership style is and what their brand is going to be to really get to know yourselves. And I've put some examples of many personality tests that I've completed over the years that really help me understand not just how I function, but also how I'm perceived. How do I take in information? How do I give information to others? And your personality is something that you really can't change and you shouldn't want to change, but really understanding how you communicate with others is going to help you be a really strong leader. I've done all of these tests. I'm a big fan of the Clifton Strength Finders, which essentially helps you figure out where your strengths are and how those strengths can be perceived as weaknesses. I also have done the Myers-Briggs. I think many people have done the Myers-Briggs evaluation. DISC assessment is also a really effective one, but there are a number of these tests that can help you better understand how you communicate with each other and also what your default is, especially in times of stress. I always pause to talk about power versus influence when I talk about leadership because power is really important. It is really the potential to accomplish your objectives, but influence is equally as important, if not more important, and it's really the manifestation of power. And so the example I like to give is a billionaire. He has a lot of money, and with that comes a lot of power. But real power is more transformative when you use it to influence the lives of others. And so this is a billionaire who is a philanthropist, and he's helping to feed and house and clothe others. That's really influence and power working together for good. And I think true leadership and good leaders are looking to basically combine those two to work best for the team and for the organization that they're in. So in terms of power, there's two kinds of powers. There's positional power and then there's personal power. Positional power is very authoritative. It comes from a hierarchy. It really involves the use of things like rewards and also for punishment. A classic example is, a chair of a department of surgery. It's very hierarchical. That comes with much authority and power. In those ways, you can either grant resources to members of your team in order to encourage them to work harder or be more productive or to do well. And similarly, you can also withhold resources as a means of punishment, again, to accomplish better productivity. I think personal power is slightly different. It really is based on consensus building. It is the generous and free sharing of information and data to every member of the team in order to ensure that everybody understands the particular situation or challenge that they're facing and understands where they fit in the process of getting to a solution. It assumes that people are competent and they bring a certain expertise to the team, and they can basically all hone in on their expertise to make the entire team stronger and to move in the same direction. For this kind of leadership style, relationships are very important. There's a lot of respect amongst the team members and a lot of support. And this tends to be where I put a lot of my energy and influence, is to try to build personal power with my teams and to be cooperative in my leadership style, and to work well. And the reason I try to lean with personal power is I do believe that personal power tends to get results more frequently and leaves the team with a sense of commitment and fulfillment. And so I think you get more longevity out of your the teams that you're leading when you use personal power. Positional power has to be used at times. It is required for some compliance and to deal with individuals that are resistant, but I try to limit the amount of positional power I use and usually only keep that for situations where it can't be avoided. And I think we've talked about this a lot. The training paradigm has changed significantly in the United States, and it's changing here in Argentina, especially as we work with the younger generation. And positional power is not as respected anymore, and it's not as effective. I think most young surgeons want coaches rather than bosses. They want to feel like they're part of a team and that they're getting better as a result. And so influencing them is much more impactful than positional power. I think it helps to develop leadership at an early age. Reliance on a title really delays development of your leadership skills because many of us won't get an official title for years, decades, even into your practice. So learning to lead early on, even without a title, I think is really important. And really, leadership is not really as much about the title as it is about how you make people feel and what your teams are able to accomplish. So I think personal power and influence is really the way. I'm going to talk about multiple styles of leadership and talk about some of the pros and cons of them. And so autocratic leadership, sort of very traditional leadership. This is where it's very top heavy. The leader sort of dictates where the team is going and what the team should do. And there are pros to this. It's very quick decision making. The direction is usually very clear. It's set from the top. And it can be very efficient because you essentially eliminate the need for much discussion and for everybody getting to consensus. It sort of really points everyone in the same direction immediately. But the con of that is it tends to exclude your team members from feeling like they're a part of the process. And so while they are able to sometimes produce, you may not have as much longevity, you may not have significant creativity. And there is some potential for resentment over time amongst the team. A democratic leadership style is what most of us try to achieve. Here we try to get to consensus building. Each individual in the team has a say in the direction that we're going. But ultimately, once a consensus is made, everyone is moving in the same direction. It tends to encourage creativity and collaboration. It increases engagement in your team members, but it can be very time consuming. It also requires that you have individuals on your team that have the expertise that's required to make all those pieces work. And those individuals have to be highly skilled in order to ensure that the entire team is moving in the same direction at the same pace. It requires buy-in and participation. And so one single person who is really out of sync with the team can be very, very distracting for the group. And then laissez-faire is sort of right in the middle. So autocratic leadership tells you what to do. Democratic leadership, they ask what should we do and we vote on it. But laissez-faire leadership says, yeah, you know, you guys can figure out how best to do it. That's much rarer, I think, in surgery, but there are times when that sort of leadership style is very effective as well. Transformational leadership really is inspirational and visionary in its approach. It's essentially trying to set a goal that the team wants to achieve. It's more so focused on where folks want to go and less so focused on the process. It allows individuals to decide how they're going to get to that goal, and it can really promote innovation and creativity. But it is highly dependent on the leader to maintain the energy, to maintain the guidance. There's a lot of expectations, usually very big swings is what I call this, for high gains, but also the potential to fail sometimes is even greater, and it is very time intensive for the leader. A lot of cheerleading. You know, you're constantly meeting with folks to ensure that everyone's moving in the right direction. And that can be one potential con of the transformational leadership style. Servant leadership really takes traditional leadership and turns it on its head. So traditional leadership styles, the leader is on top of the pyramid here. It's followed by their executive team or their management team, the employers, and then the customers, which in our case are the patients. But servant leadership really flips this upside down. So an example of servant leadership is really where the patients and their outcomes are going to be first and foremost. The employers are your team members right after that. And then the leadership and management is really at the bottom. So leaders that do this sort of style really try to ensure that they are optimizing all of the skills, resources, et cetera, that the employees need to provide for their customers. And the management and the leaders are the ones that adapt to any harsh conditions or any major changes. And I find servant leadership to be an aspiring goal for me. I try to aspire towards this every day. There are days that I do quite well, and there are days that I don't do as well. But ultimately, this is my goal as a division chief of a division that's extraordinarily talented. I have some amazing faculty members, and they really don't want to or need to be micromanaged. They need to be developed. In reality, though, a strong leader is going to use all of these styles. And essentially, strong leaders have to be nimble. You have to adapt the style of leadership that you have based on the situation. I'm actually a dominant leader on the DISC assessment and on the Myers-Briggs. So I'm actually very, very decisive. Usually I have to keep my thoughts to myself and get the team to really think about a problem and come to the same solution that I've already figured out in my head. But I really do try to be a servant leader in almost all settings, but I can very easily flip as needed to either being transformational, which sometimes you need in terms of being more autocratic, especially if your team is in limbo in terms of making a decision or unsure of which way they need to go. And then always in crises, there are definitely times where just a decision needs to be made. And so real leaders or good leaders will use all of these styles at some point in their leadership journey. Regardless of how you lead, I think there are some very basic requirements for strong leadership. One, all leaders have to be able to communicate effectively, and they need to connect with their team members effectively. They must inspire confidence. This is, I think, one of the most important attributes of a strong leader. Emotional intelligence cannot be overstated. The ability to read a room, to read your team, to anticipate their needs, to anticipate the needs of those that lead you, and be able to adapt in real time is extraordinarily important. Good leaders must build trust, and they have to promote an atmosphere where it is safe to fail, to admit failure and pivot quickly, and where conflict can actually be healthy, where people can disagree without being confrontational. I think that's a really important skill set. You have to be able to make difficult conversations easy. And I don't know if that's ever something that I'll achieve too. I find difficult conversations to be very hard, but I do think that good leaders have to have difficult conversations often. And even if it still feels uncomfortable and it's not quite easy, we're always striving towards having those difficult conversations in a way that's effective and that really communicates the opportunities for improvement and then allocates the appropriate resources to that team member. You have to manage the attention, not just of yourself, but everyone around you. You have to empower your employees if you want them to stay with you for a long time. And then I spend a lot of time studying constructive feedback. I think feedback is something that we don't do very well. As surgeons, we get immediate feedback in the operating room. You know when a surgery is going well, you know when a surgery is not going well. But outside of the operating room, I do think that as surgeons, we do struggle sometimes to give constructive feedback. And so I think that's something that I've spent a lot of time on. So as you go about building your leadership brand, I think the first thing to do is really clarify your values, understand what's personally meaningful to you. These values should represent the type of leader you want to be and how you want to lead. And I would argue that those values must include the organizational culture and the organizational priorities in order to be successful. If your values are at odds with your organization's values, then you're not going to be at that organization for very long. And so I think before you lead, you do need to ensure that all of those values align, and that really sets everyone up for the most success. I talked a little bit about this, but identifying your strengths and even more importantly, your weaknesses is very important. You can't change who you are, but you can change how you're perceived. I like to use those objective measures to gain more insights. And so I think I love data. So I've done so many personality tests and communication tests over the last 5 years. And it's been really interesting to see how they change with some intentional coaching. I always tell people to adopt a growth mindset, which means that we're not fixed in our leadership goals. We're growing as leaders, and there's much to be learned. For that reason, I read a ton. I think everyone in a major leadership role should have an executive coach. And if you are able to, I would participate in a leadership development course if those are available to you. So for me, I think finding my weaknesses is really where I spend a lot of my time. I have an executive coach, Melissa Golsham, who is wonderful. She owns a company. She's a CEO and is really able to help me get outside of the operating room and into the C-suite so that I can have very constructive conversations with executives that have been doing this a lot longer than me. I have to be able to speak their language. She's also worked with me a lot on critical or crucial conversations and having constructive feedback. I think developing young faculty and residents and fellows is very, very hard. And being able to do so requires that we be able to give feedback in a way that allows people to grow. And I think I've tried to work hard at this, and there's just still a lot of room for improvement, but she's a very important member of my team. I also think that everyone needs to have a mentoring team around them, your leadership mentorship team. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the critical members of my team. So Jeff Matthews was the chair of surgery at University of Cincinnati, where I was a medical student and recruited me to join the residency there. He has since left, and he's now the chair of surgery at University of Chicago. But Dr. Matthews and I still maintain a very strong relationship. When I was being offered opportunities to serve as division chiefs at multiple institutions, he's one of the first persons that I met with to talk about the different offers, and it really helped me align my values with the organizational values to ensure that I ended up in a place that I was going to be successful. Andrea Hayes Dixon was at MD Anderson on faculty when I was a fellow, and she was really the first Black female surgeon that I had the opportunity to work with. She has since moved on to be chair of surgery at Howard University, and she's now the dean of the School of Medicine at Howard University. But she continues to be a source of inspiration for me and somebody that I can talk about some of the nuances that we face that are different as female leaders that may not be the same, I think, for male leaders. She's been a wonderful addition to my team. Dr. Kelly Hunt is a breast and sarcoma surgeon at MD Anderson, and she's the chair of breast surgical oncology there. She's a past president of the Society of Surgical Oncology and is one of my major sponsors. She's always the first to say something nice about me when I'm not in the room. But what she also does in a really fantastic way is she really helps me hone in on opportunities for improvement without making me feel ashamed. And I really value her insight because I know she's going to tell it like it is. She's always going to be very blunt with me. My chairman, Doug Evans, is a pancreas surgeon, I think probably known by any of the hepatobiliary surgeons here. Very direct communicator. He's sort of like me. And what I like about Doug is that with him, I can just say what I think and vice versa. We work very well together. I think one of the reasons I'm successful is my vision aligns with his vision. And so we work very synergistically to really help make Medical College of Wisconsin really a destination cancer treatment site for anyone that has pancreatic cancer and pancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. And so we work collaboratively on that. And then finally, Dr. Sandra Wong, who is a past president of the SUS and currently the dean of the School of Medicine at Emory University. Again, a tremendous mentor and sponsor, someone that I talk through any difficult decision with, and she's a fantastic listener and a really good strategist. And so for each of these people I go to for different things, Doug is a master negotiator. You know, I think Sandra is a strategizer. Dr. Matthews really can cut between two things very quickly and help me hone in on the best opportunity. And so understanding which member of your team can provide you with the resources that you need in the moment is most important. But even more importantly, I think, are your peer mentors, right? So I have the fortune of being surrounded by a lot of talented folks that I trained with in residency or fellowship, or that we met through organizations like the AAS or the AHPBA. And these are the folks that I have day-to-day conversations with. And it's interesting, we've all now basically been promoted to leadership roles around the same time. So we're looking at chairs of surgery at Wake Forest and Fabian Johnston, vice chairs of their departments in Paris Butler and Oguji Madikwe, Lola, division chief of breast surgery, also Medigeta division chief of breast surgery, Melissa Hogue, division chief of surgical oncology. We've all sort of been growing together as leaders, and so we can bounce off of each other some of those very simple questions, some of those scenarios that we all face on a daily basis, and we really mentor each other in a real way in real time. After you've really honed in on your strengths and weaknesses, you have a strong mentorship team around you, make sure that you know what your passions are, and those passions are what motivates you. And it helps you develop the itinerary, the things that you want to pursue, the next step of goals. But most importantly, on the days that are difficult, and in leadership, those days are many, passion is what keeps you motivated to continue. And so I think that's essential to a strong leadership. I cannot emphasize more your need to align with the organizational leadership and the needs of the organization. I think where we see leaders fail is when they really break away from or really try to go against either the organizational culture or the organizational needs or the organizational goals. And so I think strong leaders are able to align with their organization well and figure out where they make a difference or impact. And they just strategically plan how they're going to do that. And they ensure that they have buy-in from their entire team, which includes the team that they're leading, but also the team that's leading them. And then finally, get to work. There's nothing more fun than starting to lead in your current space. Once you've defined your core values, once you've identified challenges and how you can help, find leaders that you admire, find leaders that you don't admire. Try to emphasize the values and skill sets that you see that are very effective. And then you can learn a lot about what not to do from those that are perceived as bad leaders as well. And they've really shaped my leadership style probably just as much as some of the good leaders that I have worked with. So I am going to stop there and take any questions. This is a picture of my faculty in the Division of Surgical Oncology at MCW. It's a little outdated. We have to get a new updated one. But it really is a privilege to lead such a group. And again, a privilege to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Callie. Congratulations for your excellent overview. And I will invite we have 3 commentors. I don't know who wants to start. No sé quién quiere comenzar. Doctor Osvaldo González Aguilar, le cedo la palabra. Estás muteado, Osvaldo. Doctor Marcelo Figari, le pasamos.
Ahí. Está Osvaldo.
No. Si me perdona el coordinador, yo prefiero escuchar las 2 conferencias antes de dar mi opinión sobre el significado del tema que estamos hablando.
Perfecto. Le paso la palabra entonces al
Doctor Figari.
Al doctor Figari, perdón.
I will try to comment in English in order to let Callie understand. Thank you, Dr. Clarke. I think the presentation was, and your perspective was wonderful. And I would like to point out and to reinforce your vision about the importance of the personal power based on how you are able to influence others, to promote personal development, to show them through role modeling the right way to follow, to promote commitment. This is really very important. I agree with you that we rotate using different types of leaderships according different roles in our surgical life. Of course, if I need to select one type of leadership, is the inspirational one, because it's more I would say, according to our mission in academic surgery. But as you say, besides the personal competencies that the leader has, is important what the leader does in the daily life in order to increase truth in your surgical environment, to show people the right direction with clarity, and to promote also the personal growth and the personal development. My question to you, because you were very lucky in your life and you found very positive people that really helped you a lot in order to reach this point. In your daily life with your residents, with your fellows, and your staff surgeons, how do you really promote activities, educational activities with them? Because leadership is a thing that you really educate along your life in order to let them discuss these topics and then make a commitment to change. What strategy educating your group?
Please, Callie.
You're muted.
So that's a great question. So I agree with you that one of the strongest things as surgeons that we have to do to lead is actually be an outstanding surgeon, right? I think surgical leaders have to be able to show and demonstrate skills that are commensurate with their leadership. So we have to be able to do the tough cases, the bigger cases, and do them well with good outcomes. And certainly, I think that really fosters an environment of leadership. I'm very vulnerable with my residents, and I think part of that is because of my age. I'm relatively young for a division chief in the United States. I'm only in my 9th year of practice, and I've been in this role for about a year. So when I started as a division chief, I was leading a division of 21 people, half of whom had been there for much longer than I had been. They had all recruited me. And then the other half that I had recruited. And so, and then a fellowship and residence. And so what I do is I actually, in the moment, try to teach and lead. We do a lot of informal teaching in my office, especially after a big case or after a challenging case. And then I also do a lot of teaching in the clinics, and specifically about how to build a practice and how to build a practice where patients travel to see you. So they're not necessarily just coming from referring providers. And I think fellows and residents are very responsive to that. We have graduated autonomy in the United States in the operating room, in that, you know, we don't, it's a little bit different. We have our academic practice and our private practice is mixed. So, so it's a fine balance, because the outcomes of the patients really drive how busy you are, and you can't just give autonomy unless it's earned to the residents. So we have to explain that to them. All of our patients are private patients. And so the duty is for us to provide and deliver a perfect operation every single time and a perfect experience every single time, as much as we can. And so there's a lot of back and forth in the operating room, and they really have to understand that the outcomes here are gonna what really drives the practice. We do some, I do some formal leadership development with the residents and fellows, especially as they near the end of their residency. So for the chief residents, who are the graduating residents, and for the fellows, I actually, we do a quarterly dinner where we meet and we talk about topics like, you know, looking for your first job, how to negotiate for your first job. We talk about salary, practice building, how to, you know, communicate with referring providers. And the other thing is how to make an ask from the hospital for resources to build a program. So we intermingle some of the didactic, you know, teaching sessions on leadership development, along with the everyday activities of surgery. You know, we do have an 80-hour work week, but I think a lot of that teaching happens after that 80 hours.
Yeah.
And our fellows are actually quite receptive to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cali. Doctor Fabio Leiro, su comentario.
Gracias, gracias Alberto. Bueno, intentaré también hacer mi comentario en inglés. I think, as it's always said, that to be a good leader is there are some personality features that are that are really necessary, as being honest, integrity, and the will to serve others. I think that you wouldn't be a good leader if you're honest people, integrity, and willing to serve others. But I think that there are other skills that are also necessary, like emotional intelligence and communication skills. And these two things can be learned. I think that if you are honest, or you are honest or you are not, but you can learn communication skills, and you can learn or manage your emotional intelligence. But this is not easy. It's really hard to know. These are things that are difficult to learn. Even if you go you are coached in these matters, it's not easy to learn. And as parents, we act differently with our kids. And I think that when you're a leader, you should act differently with the individuals and teams. And I'd like to make Cali a comment about this. How does she manage the different personalities of their team members and the individuals that work with her? Thank you.
So hi, thank you. So I reiterate everything you said. You're completely right. I think, you know, honesty, integrity, a spirit of, you know, empathy is really necessary for all leaders. And that, you're right, cannot be taught. I do think that those are skills that usually people have and bring with them to the table. But I do think you're right, the rest of it can be learned. In terms of how to manage the different personalities, and specifically how to manage difficult personalities, which we all have to manage, I think first and foremost was my understanding, and this is where the growth mindset helps, my understanding that all leaders don't have to be like me. For a team member to be good at what they do and to be valuable to my team, they don't need to be exactly like me. And in fact, the diversity of personalities helps us to be better as a team. So we've spent a fair amount of time in our team of our division of surgical oncology, owning and celebrating some of the personality traits that makes us different, but also makes us a little quirky. So I am somebody who really cannot stand external noises. It drives me crazy. I think I'm on the autism spectrum. And everybody knows that about me now. And so they know that about me, and they understand that in certain situations, that might be a trigger. And if I am triggered in a situation, it's not because of you, it's because of this external noise that I have. And we have some people that are pessimists on my team. Like, it doesn't matter what idea I come up with, they are going to think it's a terrible idea. But those are the folks that I go to first when I'm coming up with an idea, because it allows me to plan for the potential pitfalls as I try to sell this. So you try to manage those personalities, you turn those personalities into a plus when possible. But there are times when you just have to manage difficult personalities. The way that I do that is I try to take this offline. So we don't have public fights. We don't do that in meetings, and we don't do that outside of offices. If you have to have a critical conversation, it happens behind closed doors. And I try to make it not about the individual, but about the behavior and about the impact that that behavior has on the team. So that they understand that this is not an indictment on them. We value them as a person, we value them as a team member, but this behavior is not something that's valuable or helpful in this particular situation. So I try to decouple behavior from personalities as much as possible. Again, just encourage a lot of frank conversations, and they're sometimes quite challenging, and it takes a lot of time. I will say that you always spend the majority of your time on a few people, and it's always the people that are a little challenging to work with.
Well, thank you.
Alberto, discúlpame, ahí en el canal de YouTube hay una pregunta que el doctor Bondulich te va a pasar ahora para la profesora, que la hace el doctor Oscar Melín desde Ciudad de México. Gustavo.
No puedo acceder. A ver, Sunjo, si me puedes ayudar, porque no puedo acceder a la...
La pregunta es, Alberto,
Yo no
si
la
el test
tengo.
Alonso es útil para determinar el estilo de aprendizaje de cada persona de acuerdo a sus aptitudes. ¿Vale la pena utilizarlo?
No te escuché la primera parte, discúlpame,
Y el
Jorge.
test de Honey-Alonso es útil para determinar el estilo de aprendizaje de cada persona de acuerdo a sus aptitudes. Si vale la pena utilizarlo.
¿Me puedes repetir el nombre del test? Porque no te escucho.
Honey-Alonso.
Perfect. Cali, there's a question from Mexico asking about the usefulness of the test of Connie Alonso for evaluating the best leadership style. I personally do not know this parameter. I don't know if you are familiar with that.
Yes, I am. I think it's one test. I think that people should not rely on a single test. I have probably taken 10 different tests, and I think all of them offer something different. So I think any test is helpful, but I would not rely exclusively on one personality test to help you figure out your leadership style. As I mentioned, leadership is a journey. The way I use these tests is I take the test, I look at what it perceives my strengths to be, and very quickly I rotate to what are my potential gaps. And then I use the test to try to identify which gaps I'm going to achieve or work on for the next 6 months, 1 year, etc. And then in another 1 or 2 years, I'll do another test. And so it's a constant growth plan. So I think that is a great test to start with. But I would encourage you to do as many tests as possible, and to do so at different time points in your career, so that you're continuing to identify areas that you can improve. And it also tells you, have you improved on the things that you've been working on? So every time you take another test, it also will evaluate those areas that you had previously identified and that you're currently trying to implement some processes to improve. That's been the most interesting thing for me, is taking the tests again. While there's some core principles that remain the same, my communication has drastically changed. My ability to manage conflict has drastically improved. And you can see that in those tests over time.
Thank you. So I don't see Dr. Luke Funk. Please, if you are able to share your screen, and we are going to listen to his lecture now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Luke.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Academy. I want to thank Dr. Hyun, Dr. Latif, and Dr. Ferreres for the opportunity for Dr. Clarke and I to speak this evening. It's really a privilege. I was reading, about the history of the society over the past, 100 years or so, and it's been really a unique and inspirational group of surgeons, and so it's really a privilege to speak. I thought when I was trying to decide what topic to speak about, I thought talking about this idea about progressing from a protege or a mentee to a mentor might be applicable, given that I know there's a lot of senior folks and a lot of current leaders, past Academy presidents, current Academy presidents, for example, that are in this meeting, and maybe there's some mid-career and earlier career folks as well that could perhaps take something away. I don't have any conflicts. There's one financial disclosure that is a research grant from the U.S. Veterans Health Administration that's for an obesity trial that's unrelated to this presentation. So my objectives in this talk are really to talk about some ideas for transitioning from a mentee to a mentor in academic surgery. Obviously, it's something that every single surgeon goes through from day 0 to year 10, 20, 30, 40. And really, I think of this along the trajectory here from early career to mid-career to later career. And there's a few things that I wanted to touch on. Building your surgical skills and knowledge, starting right away. Eventually taking on some leadership opportunities, creating collaborations and networks as you progress through your career, and then developing mentoring skills. And so just a little bit about me. So I started on the faculty. I'm in my, I think, 12th year now on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. There's a picture of our campus, and we're on an isthmus, and so there's a lake to the north and a lake to the south, and there's our undergraduate campus there, that building in the middle. So I started in September of 2013, and obviously everything was zeros at that point. I had 0 cases in attending, 0 publications as an attending, 0 semesters of course teaching, and 0 students, residents, and other trainees who I had mentored. And at that time, there's a picture of myself, my wife, who's an ER physician, and our son, Logan, who was 2 years old when I started my faculty position. And if we fast forward to, a few days ago, I've done around 2,050 cases as an attending, published a number of manuscripts. I've taught students both sort of formally in the classroom, but then also obviously on the wards in the operating room now for 18 semesters. And, I've mentored from a research perspective, over 50 high school students, college students, graduate students, medical students, postgraduate fellows and residents, and obviously mentored a number of individuals who are rotating through our clinical residencies and then our clinical fellowship. I'm a minimally invasive and bariatric surgeon. And also my family's changed. So that's Logan, the 2-year-old. He's now 13, and now he has a little brother, Chase, who's 10. So a lot has changed over the past 11 years, and I've learned a lot. I think about how to think about things as both a mentee and then now a mentor. And so, what is mentorship? A mentee is defined as someone who is advised, trained, or counseled by a mentor. And a mentor is defined by the Merriam Dictionary, or the Webster Dictionary, as an experienced and trusted advisor. And there are various domains of mentorship. There's advice, guidance, providing support, providing help during times of need. And so it really, is numerous elements of being an effective mentor. And so I used a sports example earlier in one of my talks today. I love sports, soccer, obviously big in Argentina. And so when you think about why does mentorship matter, there's a picture of Messi with Ronaldinho when they were teammates in Barcelona. And that was earlier on in his career, and it's well documented that Ronaldinho was an important mentor for him. And if you think about where he is today, how he's progressed in his career, he's really now the mentor. The championship team here with Copa America a few months ago, and all those guys on his team are his juniors now. And so he's looked at as the mentor and the leader. And so mentorship mattered for him. And so why did it matter for me? How did it impact me? I really had two sort of academic mentors. I have a number of clinical mentors as well, and sponsors in surgery and academic surgery nationally, but really two sort of stood out to me and influenced my career in academic surgery. One is Caprice Greenberg, who recruited me to the University of Wisconsin. She's a health services researcher. And her husband was a couple of years ahead of me in residency, and I knew them well, and they recruited me to UW. Caprice is now the chair of surgery at the University of North Carolina. The other mentor of mine is not a surgeon. She is a health psychologist. She's was initially at Duke. We recruited her to the University of Wisconsin. She's a professor of surgery, and she's also a health services researcher focused on behavioral interventions to improve chronic diseases such as obesity. So we work pretty closely together from a research perspective. And so their mentorship was really critical for the development of my academic career. And so that's a figure from one of the grants that we applied for, my Career Development Award. And you can see Dr. Voiles was the primary mentor on that research experience. This was a grant looking at a mixed methods grant looking at how to improve utilization of evidence-based obesity care, surgery, medicine, behavioral weight management. So Dr. Voiles was involved as a primary mentor. Dr. Greenberg was also a mentor, more from a sort of health services methodologic standpoint. And, together our team with those two mentoring me, we're able to secure a number of research grants from the American Society for Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery, from the Veterans Health Administration, from the National Institutes of Health. And then, the VA is currently a merit award where Dr. Voiles is my co-I. And I could not have attained success with these research experiences without their counseling, their advice, and their input. And, when I think about some of the work that's come from this research, you can see the theme is bariatric surgery, barriers to surgery, how to address the barriers, both with qualitative research, so focus groups and interviews, as well as interventions. And so these are, a number of our publications, and you can see Dr. Voiles, for example, is on every one of those publications. And, now we're collaborators. I'm senior author on a lot more, and she's a co-author, but she still, to this day, remains an important member of our research team. And so in terms of considerations when you're progressing from an early career surgeon and a mentee to a mentor, these sort of thoughts are what I'm going to touch on over the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So one of the key things I think when you're starting out earlier in your career was certainly important for me, and I was given advice to consider, make sure that you establish your reputation as a safe and competent surgeon starting out. And focusing, obviously we want to focus on good outcomes throughout our entire career, but particularly early on in your career, because that's when you're going to establish a reputation as an excellent clinical surgeon. So for example, for me as a bariatric surgeon, I didn't take on a lot of revisional bariatric surgery early on. I didn't take a lot of high BMI patients early on. patients that were high, transplant patients, that sort of thing. I focused on more straightforward bariatric cases. And obviously you need strong partners and colleagues to help support you, which is where the environment's really key when you're starting out. But I think getting that reputation established both clinically and from an academic perspective early on is key. And so, how do you establish your academic reputation? Well, if you're in the research space, you want to publish and present your work, disseminate your work regionally, nationally, hopefully globally eventually. And during that time, I think early on, you really want to reach out both across your campus, your department, and potentially even beyond your university or your hospital, your organization, to find who your mentors are going to be. So, why is it worthwhile to do this? Well, obviously, it's good for patients and it's good for your career, but it's going to attract mentees who want to work for you. So here's a few examples of folks that I started working with. Dr. Liu, who's now a minimally invasive bariatric surgeon at North Shore in Chicago. Dr. Murtha, who's a chief resident and going into surgical oncology, and most recently, Dr. Dada Jawara, who just worked with me for a couple of years. He's currently a third-year resident. And so, they had productive research experiences, all of them did, and it really helps everyone. So here's an example of some of the papers that we published. And, Dr. Liu, Dr. Murtha are on these publications with me. Dr. Jawara is as well. His publications were more recent, so they're not included on this screenshot. But it really goes to show, in addition to advancing science, it helps early career trainees and faculty develop their careers when you mentor, and that's very personally rewarding for me. So the next consideration is to take on leadership opportunities. Obviously, Dr. Clarke just touched on a number of elements of what it takes to be an effective leader. But I'm going to sort of address why take on leadership opportunities, why do it? For one, it increases your situational awareness because you're in the room where decisions are being made. And so it increases your knowledge about your department, about your field, about your hospital, your organization, your national societies. And it makes you relevant and impactful. And you can amplify your impact when you're a leader, not only with clinical program development, but also the career development of all of your faculty, which, is another area that Dr. Clarke touched a lot on, sort of how she helps develop her faculty. And that's one of the most critical aspects of being a leader. And frankly, it's rewarding to see others succeed. And, when you become a leader, I think, at least how I try to think about it is, it's critical to start focusing on others rather than myself. Earlier on in your career, when you're trying to establish your clinical and research programs, you have to sort of focus on yourself, to sort of build your career. But when you're a leader, I think the focus needs to be on everybody else. And so my path, if you look at when I started in 2013 to where I'm at now, I was assistant professor for 6 years and then promoted to associate professor with tenure and then professor this year. And so it's been graduated responsibility of leadership opportunities. So I was initially the director of minimally invasive surgery research for our division at the university. Then I became the section chief of the VA general surgery, and then most recently the vice chair research for our department. And so it's sort of been an increasing level of leadership opportunities at the institutional level. And then that's gone along with various research grants and opportunities to address the obesity area of interest that I have from a academic perspective. So there are leadership opportunities that are obviously available at your institution. In the U.S., we have sections, divisions, departments, and I think you also have similar sort of setup here in Argentina. You could be a service line director. So, a common one is a cancer center director, for example. You may be a vice chair. So our department, we've got a vice chair of education, research, clinical operations, and DEI as well. You can also be a leader at the regional and the national level. And that comes primarily through organizations, societies. So there's a few of the societies that I belong to. I'm a SAGES, the ASMBS are sort of the more clinical societies, and then there's more academic societies like the SUS and obviously the AAS. You can also get involved in editorial boards in the publishing process if you are an active researcher. I think that is another way to have an impact in the field, to participate on editorial boards or even as associate editor of journals. I'm going to talk a little bit about my involvement in the AAS, which is frankly the reason that I'm down in Buenos Aires currently, my association with the AAS and my involvement in the AAS. And so it's been a sort of progressive involvement for me over the past 9 years. I started on our program committee, which helps sort of set the agenda for our annual meeting, the Academic Surgical Congress. I was on the nominating committee for a couple of years, and then I was our publications committee co-chair and chair for a couple of years, the leadership committee, and then currently the treasurer. So, it's been sort of a great learning opportunity for me and a great opportunity for me to network. And so that leads me into my next theme here, which is, building collaborations and networking as you progress along your career. And so here's a few examples of some individuals that I've had the opportunity to network with because of my involvement in surgical societies. So Dr. Hughes is a minimally invasive bariatric surgeon at Indiana. And I met him through really the AAS. So his department chair, Dr. Carl Bellamoria, is a former president of the AAS, and he connected us, and I'm a co-mentor on his Career Development Award. Dr. Yewande Alimi, she's a minimally invasive bariatric surgeon at Georgetown. She studies obesity and disparities research. I met her through the AAS and connected via a couple of her other AAS mentors and colleagues, including Dr. Clarke. And I'm a co-mentor on one of her grant submissions. And then Dr. Alabi, who's a vascular surgeon down at Emory. She's looking at studying, she's a health services researcher studying disparities in vascular outcomes. And I met her through the Association of VA Surgeons. And so she reached out to me, to support her on one of her VA grant submissions. And so I think my involvement and, leadership experiences within these societies sort of allowed me to connect with these individuals, and they're the future, they're the rising stars, and it's really rewarding and enjoyable to support them. And then finally, developing mentoring skills. So mentoring takes time, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a skill set. And I think that skill set is different than what it takes to be a good technical surgeon, what it takes to be a good researcher, what it takes to be a good administrator. And so I have a few examples here of things that I think are helpful for mentoring. One of the questions earlier today during one of our sessions was, how do you mentor Gen Z and millennials? They're very different than the older generations, even my generation, where, you kind of got beat up and people didn't mince words, and it was tough. In younger generations or younger sort of current trainees and earlier career surgeons, they don't really tolerate that as well. And so I think it's on us to, need to adjust to that somewhat. And so some of the skills, I just want to, bring up a couple of examples here, highlighting some of these principles. So a trainee states, I'm having a hard time maintaining my research deadlines. We're also completing my clinical duties. I feel there isn't enough time. I'm failing in both areas. The old school way, maybe a way that I don't think is as effective. You need to figure it out. Being a surgeon's hard. Not really actively listening, not very empathetic. A different strategy that involves active listening, paraphrase, sounds like you're being overwhelmed and trying to balance your research responsibilities. Is that accurate? Clarifying the problem. Can you tell me more about the challenges? Being empathetic. I understand how hard this can be. We've all been there. Kind of summarizing and then supporting them and advising them, providing specific suggestions. So let's see if we can find a solution together. I got your back. Maybe we can look at your schedule and identify or prioritize things that you can delegate, and I can share what's worked for me. I think providing constructive feedback is key, and sometimes it's hard, particularly in the OR. We've all been there. You're frustrated. Things aren't going well. Perhaps maybe you're working with a trainee or a student that is struggling. Maybe they can't even tie a knot, for example, in the operating room. It's easy to be critical and, to be vague. And so, your suture tying's terrible. You got to get better. Patients are going to suffer. Obviously, you read that and it's pretty harsh and not very effective. And so there's a different mentorship strategy, positive observation. I noticed that you're focused on the correct technique. That's fantastic. Here's one area for improvement. Try to, specifically suggestion, try to maintain uniform loop size by keeping constant tension on the suture. That'll help you secure your knots. So give them something that they can build on. And then finally, I think role modeling professionalism is critical. That was touched on earlier during one of the sessions, demonstrating ethical behavior. So Patient confidentiality is critical, obviously. Showing integrity in your research processes. If you're making decisions, be transparent about your decision making. Be on time. Be an active participant, like we all are tonight, in continuing education, conferences, courses, ongoing academic and professional development. Be open to feedback. It's not just a one-way street. I think particularly, again, with earlier career and junior faculty, they're going to want to let us know what they think. And I think we need to welcome that and be open to it. And then I think, promoting optimal work-life presence is key. And so what's that about? Modeling self-care and, respecting your personal time outside of the hospital, outside of the clinic. Do the things you like to do. Exercise. I love to golf. I love to travel. I love to eat good food, which is why I've been loving being in Buenos Aires for the past few days. Maybe you do yoga. Whatever you do, pursue that so you have some presence. And then finally, I think, in the US, it's become more prevalent to consider pursuing formal mentorship training. And so here's an example of a mentorship program, a formal mentorship program that's publicly available. And you can see in their curriculum, it touches on a number of the themes that I was talking about. So, being ethical, work-life, they call it integration or balance. How do you foster independence and well-being? How do you communicate effectively? How do you promote professional development and value diversity and equity and inclusion, for example? It's hard to do those on your own or just sort of, piecemeal or as things sort of come or as you're presented with challenges. I think it's reasonable to consider doing some formal training in that space. I've taken a couple of short courses and found them to be valuable experiences. So in summary, mentorship expands your impact, and frankly, it makes your career much more fulfilling, as I'm sure many of you have experienced during your careers. I think for the earlier and mid-career folks, as you progress, the focus is going to move from you and yourself to others and how you can support and build others. And I think mentorship skills, they're not the same as what it takes to do a good Whipple or do a good, gastric bypass or whatever your specialty is, your parotidectomy for the head and neck surgeon leaders here. And so I think a formal consideration is useful. I want to thank the Academy for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Funk, for your insightful lecture. And I would like then to move on to the comments. So, Dr. Osvaldo González Aguilar, ahora que ha escuchado las dos conferencias, si nos puede brindar sus comentarios, si es tan amable.
Muchas gracias, señor coordinador. First of all, my congratulations to Fang and Clarke, MD, for the excellent lecture. En nuestro medio, las figuras de maestro, mentor y líder son a menudo confundidas, superpuestas o mal interpretadas. El dilema es cómo un discípulo llega a ser un líder. Para ello, el discípulo debe tener la impronta de un maestro, o sea, las características culturales, humanas, que aplica como propias de su maestro. Ahora, el maestro inculca a sus discípulos en forma directa, como lo hiciera Jesucristo con sus discípulos, o indirectamente a través de la obra, que puede ser su obra, que puede ser filosófica, artística o quirúrgica. En un libro de anecdotarios judíos, un estudioso le preguntaba al rabino, ¿cómo reconocer al maestro? Y la respuesta fue, son los discípulos quienes justifican al maestro. Ahora, respecto a maestro, no es correcto creer que solo el que se sienta frente a los alumnos y da una clase en el pizarrón. Maestro es el que tiene un desempeño impecable de su profesión y además es éticamente paradigmático. Sócrates decía, nunca fui maestro de nadie, y si alguien dice lo contrario, sepan que no dice la verdad. Pero poco después de los 60, tuvo muchos seguidores que lo escuchaban, lo seguían y hasta lo imitaban. Ahora bien, el mentor, al que se ha referido también Dr. Frank MD, el maestro, el mentor no es un genio, ni un sabio, ni un super yo. Mentor es el instructor, educador, preceptor y siempre está dispuesto a aconsejar y guiar. Para ello debe seguir el sano recorrido impuesto por un buen maestro y un buen mentor. De ahí que gran parte de los residentes en los Estados Unidos saluden a sus mentores antes que a sus propios jefes. Finalmente, el líder es la persona capaz de inspirar y asociar a otros en un sueño. Ahora, buen líder es la persona responsable, comunicativa y organizada. Por lo tanto, el liderazgo es influenciar a la gente para que se empeñe en el logro de objetivos del grupo, ayudándolos a ser optimistas para ver una oportunidad en cada dificultad. Again, I congratulate the presentations we listened tonight. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, doctor González Aguilar. Doctor Figari, su comentario respecto a la...
Thank you very much, Dr. Frank, for your fantastic presentation. And it's clear all the conditions and the competencies that a surgeon needs to be a mentor, and not only in the technical sphere, but also in the attitudinal, in the moral, in the personal life of a mentee. My question to you, in order not to be long in my words, is how do you promote not only in the personal level, because sometimes you see people that could be a mentor, but they don't devote the time to be that, or they don't consider it important, or they have not been motivated in order to be a mentor. How do you consider it's important that on an institutional level, in your hospital, or in a society level, you really promote a network of mentors and mentees? And probably this is closely related to your final comment about the need to educate people to be a mentor. But it's important, the role of the hospital as institution and of the society as institution in order to promote more people interacting as mentors and mentees. This is my question to you.
Yeah, so that's so I heard a couple of components of your comment. One is this idea about, how do you sort of support and encourage folks who are not maybe as interested in mentorship, and that's not an uncommon scenario where folks maybe for whatever reason are still focused on their careers and their their research programs, their educational programs. And they have a lot of wisdom and a lot to share, but they may not necessarily, be interested in spending that time. Maybe you'll hear, we don't get paid to do that. I don't make any extra money to be, a good mentor. But I think part of it is, trying to reinforce that that's really part of the mission. It is your job as an academic surgeon is, to be a mentor. We wouldn't be, in these positions, Dr. Clarke wouldn't be, in her position as a division chief at an academic medical center. I wouldn't be in my position if we weren't interested in focused on leading the next generation. And so I think part of it is, making sort of talking directly with those faculty about, what their sort of hesitation is to mentor, and then encouraging them, as you alluded to consider formal mentorship training. I think I'm not a mentorship professional. I have taken the training and I think I am aware of some of the key principles, but I don't know how to teach someone to be a good mentor. There are professionals that do that. And so I really think it's helpful to take a day, take an afternoon, take a couple of days to really sort of dedicate towards some formal skills, because it's not something that we learn during training. You don't learn it in your fellowship. Some people are naturally good at it because they have high emotional intelligence and they care and they want to be. That's why they're there, but not everyone. And so I think that's where sort of formal training can come in and be helpful.
Thank you very much.
El doctor Fabio Leiro, su comentario.
Gracias, Dr. Ferreres. Thanks, Dr. Fang, for your excellent conference. I think that most chiefs or chairs I knew, in fact, our mentors, were not necessarily be good leaders as long as we consider it nowadays. But they were considered great bosses or great chiefs, and maybe they would be considered as well good chiefs or good bosses nowadays. I think that mentees are who decide what a good mentor is and what a good leader is. And I think that times has changed so much, and innovation and continuous change is something that has changed also our mindsetting and the mindsetting of future mentees. I would like to ask you if you were a manager at your hospital, if you have to decide who would be the chair of your surgical department, what would you consider essential? Surgical skills, management skills, research skills, or leadership skills, or both, or every of them? What would
Can
you?
I pick all of those?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Dr. Clarke touched on this, first and foremost, it's someone that you want to, that everybody is going to respect clinically. They're a good surgeon. They take good care of patients. They, lead from the front, so for example, they're willing perhaps to even take call. Yeah, maybe not as much, but they're willing to get down in the trenches. I think that's one way that you can get your faculty to really run through a brick wall for you if you need to, if you're in it with us. So I think that technical excellence and clinical excellence first. I think, having a strong research portfolio in a lot of U.S. academic medical centers is important because research is obviously a big part of our mission. And if you don't have any research experience, then it's sort of harder to, I think, recruit some of those academic faculty that are interested in that. It's harder to generate revenue for the department, to work with the dean at the medical school. And so I think, most of our top tier academic chairs in the US have a fairly strong research background as well, because it helps them sort of navigate that element. I think the other critical thing is you want a leader who is going to focus on faculty development and retention, and somebody who is willing to go to bat for your faculty. Because Dr. Clarke touched on this again, you don't want people to leave. You want to retain your strong faculty. You want to retain your clinical workhorses. You want to retain your strong researchers. You want to retain your great educators. And so I think that's part of a chair's job, is to, know who needs support in different areas and to try to work with each faculty member to give them what they need to find fulfillment and to be successful in their careers. I think, some of the best chairs in the US, they have very high, at least from my experience and from what I've seen, they have very high emotional intelligence, and they will go to bat for their faculty. They will support their faculty, and they'll help them build their careers, to a point where eventually, they're not going to stay there forever, perhaps. Maybe you want to see your faculty grow and then take leadership positions at other institutions when the time's right. But I think you need to provide your faculty with those tools to continue to develop their careers if you're going to be a chair, because, we will be looking to you to help us with that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Clarke. No, yo no tengo acceso al chat.
I don't, Alberto, I don't see any question.
Perfect. Well,
I have a question.
go ahead, please.
Please. Oh, nice conference, both of them. Thank you very much for bringing these issues to the academy. I would like to make a simple question. And the question is, leaders are made or born?
Who wants to take the challenge then?
So I think leaders are made. And that's because I do ascribe to this growth mindset, which is that while there's some skills that are innate, I think the skills that are most leaders need to be exceptional are actually learned. I think there's some people that catch on to this a little bit faster. They're personality types that can pay attention to the people around them and integrate that leadership style into their daily activities early. And those are the people that we tend to say are they're born leaders, but what they've done is they have high emotional intelligence, and along their trajectory, they've just incorporated bits and pieces of effective leadership, so that by the time they present as residents or junior faculty, they've really had a big handle on how to do it well. But I think those skills continue to grow, and you have to continue to hone them. It also then means that if you meet someone a little bit later in their career who has not adopted those skills, but now desires to, for whatever reason, that they can learn how to be an effective leader. And so I consider leadership something that's acquired and not something that you're born with. And I try to teach that to all of the residents.
Thank you,
Thank
Carly.
you.
Hugh, do you want to add some additional comments?
Alberto, el doctor Sun Ho-hyun pidió la palabra.
Perfecto, Zoom,
No,
adelante.
no lo tenés en tu tablero, por eso interrumpí.
Okay,
Adelante,
thank you
Sun.
so much. Thank you, Dr. Clarke and Dr. Funk, for your excellent conferences. I'd like to make a question that might apply to both of your conferences. Maybe part of the time of a leader or a mentor might be, administrating personal expectations and interests, and also balancing these personal issues with the wellness of the group, right, or the corporation or the team. But sometimes, these differences, these interests could be not complementary or going on the same direction, but sometimes could be there could be a conflict there. So how would you deal with this, or what would be the limit, when you have to sacrifice a personal interest or a member of the group in the benefit of the whole group? Because, of course, when you're prioritizing the group, an individual might feel that his expectations are not being fulfilled, and vice versa. So what would you think would be the right balance, and what would be the limit in which you have to talk to this person maybe and say, well, you might not fit in this group, in this team, and how would you deal with that?
I can maybe start, and then maybe Luke, you can jump in. So this is actually a situation I've had to deal with, right? So I think, first of all, the concept of balance and wellness is something that we're constantly chasing, especially in the United States. It's really emphasized in residency. And I tell the residents that really, being a general surgery resident, being a surgical oncology fellowship is being in a state of unwellness for the time of your training, simply because the demands are so high that, and the patients are so complex that ultimately there will be morbidities, there will be mortalities, and you have to really learn how to manage that. I think where people truly become unbalanced in their mental health and wellness journeys is the feeling of not being able to control the situation. And so what I try to do is give both my faculty and my residents the tools that they need to manage these very high swings emotionally that we deal with, and the low swings emotionally that we deal with, so that you can be at a steady state more often. But the expectation that it's always going to be steady is false. And that continues in practice, as we know. In terms of team members that are either detrimental to the group or not a good fit, I think, one, I spend a lot of time emphasizing this in the recruitment phase, because it's much easier to identify somebody who's not going to be a good fit before they join the team than it is to dismiss them after. So we have a very robust recruitment and hiring process when it comes to surgical oncology. We just posted a pancreas job. We had 38 very qualified surgeons all across the country apply. And we have a team of physicians. This includes medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, interventional radiologists, folks that we work with regularly, being on the panel that evaluates all of these applicants and ultimately does the interview. So we spend a lot of time on the interview process. And I do ask questions that tease out some of the things that we talked about. How do you manage conflict? How do you have difficult conversations? Do you value diversity? So that I can get an assessment about how this person fits into the team. But if you've made a mistake or you've inherited a team member that is just not adding to the team and in fact is distracting for the team, then I think the first thing to do is actually to acknowledge that. And you have to basically, again, make the issues clear. So in my case, this was an individual whose surgical outcomes were not consistent with the outcomes of the rest of the group, and was a major distractor for us, and really inhibited our ability to grow in practice because of external referring providers being concerned about the quality care that they're doing. So the first thing I had to do was you have to have data. So you collect the data. You have the cases. In many hospitals, there's actually a team of physicians that can review this data so that it's not just a decision that I've made or an evaluation that I've made. So we basically had alignment between the hospital quality system and my assessment about the outcomes of this individual. The next thing I had to do was I had to get buy-in from my leader, my boss. I can't make a decision without my boss being supportive. And so then you take that next step, you have those critical conversations. And then we meet with the individual and we lay out what the problems are. It's driven by data, and we give them an opportunity for improvement. So we do a whole process improvement plan, some mentorship in the operating room, some guidance in the clinic, discussing your cases in a multidisciplinary setting before you move to the operating room, et cetera. And then we make it clear that, we're doing this to support your growth and we're being supportive. In my case, the individual chose not to follow the process improvement plan. So it made it much easier for us to separate because essentially they decided, in my opinion, the way we presented, if you decide not to participate in the improvement, then you're decided not to be a part of the team. And so in other words, I feel like they made the decision to terminate themselves. And so we just issued, you can issue basically a non-renewal. This person actually ended up moving on to another job. And this can be a surgeon. It can be a statistician. It could be a researcher. Sort of the concepts are the same. So I think using data to support what the challenges are as much as possible, being very open and transparent with that data. And then it takes multiple conversations. These conversations happened over, I think, 6 to 7 months. And each conversation was, very challenging. And then also utilize the resources around you. We had human services. We have an HR department, human service resources available, and they were very much aware of the process. And ultimately, we actually parted in good terms. And this is somebody that I still reach out to. I think they're doing much better in the environment that they're in.
Bueno, no habiendo más preguntas ni comentarios tanto en el canal de YouTube como en el chat de los señores académicos, y antes de dar por finalizada la reunión de hoy, yo quiero agradecer profundamente a los profesores Clarke y Funk por las excelentes y acertadas conferencias que hoy hemos escuchado, al doctor Alberto Ferreres, que fue el gestor de esta reunión, y a los excelentes y sobrios comentarios de los doctores González Aguilar, Marcelo Figari y Fabio Leiro. reuniones como esta jerarquizan nuestra actividad académica y son muy importantes y son muy consideradas, y por eso el agradecimiento a todos ustedes esta noche, Alberto, para que se lo transmitas a los dos expositores. Así que muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos y los esperamos el miércoles próximo en la reunión conjunta de la Academia Argentina de Cirugía con la Sociedad de Cirugía de Córdoba. Buenas noches a todos.